The city of Ocean Springs responding to a civil lawsuit against them over their urban renewal plan. The city filed a motion last week to dismiss that lawsuit. In April, the city of Ocean Springs proposed 6 areas it's looking at for redevelopment. As part of the plan, officials would be allowed to acquire property, demolish unwanted or blighted buildings, and construct inside those zones as they see fit. The filed lawsuit challenges the city, claiming it's taking away property rights without due process, which is a violation of the U.S. Constitution. At tomorrow's Board of Aldermen meeting, a new map will be presented, and we'll hear more about that tonight coming up at 10 o'clock.